Well, I'm seeing all kinds of names I recognize. People from
Hi, John.
Rotary and the parks.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Hello, John.
Hello.
Fan club is here, John.
Yeah,
Yeah,
clearly.
people from my meetup group.
Hello.
You're going to know all my stories. Michael, hi.
Hi there, John.
Right, we still have a few more here to admit.
So now that I see Michael there, I'm going to have to tell my story with Michael in it.
Which one is that?
Which one?
Did you see the announcement? There's a picture of me holding a king snake.
Oh, at Crane Creek.
You got it. That's right.
Yeah, I know that story.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hello. Margo.
And pardon the pause, but it's just taking a while for Zoom to admit everybody. I'm watching you all slowly filter through, so I'm just going to wait until that's done.
So right now we have about 49 participants.
Oh,
So please excuse me if I don't say hi to everyone that I know, because I can't see everybody I know.
Yeah, you have to
It's not going on.
Use the other one. Yeah, it's maybe backwards. I don't use it, so I don't know.
But that's,
I'm going to wait just one more minute because John has so much wonderful stuff to say today, so I don't want to put it on too long of a pause. And I'll just try to keep admitting people while I'm talking. And maybe, Margot, you can help me with that when I'm
I'll do that for you.
giving the intro here. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yep, still people coming. Okay, I'm going to leave
I'll
that to
do that,
Margot.
Carrie.
Thank you. All right, everybody, I am going to get started. Welcome. Today you are at Learn with a Naturalist, Storytelling in Nature. My name is Carrie Winninger, and I am the outreach lead for the Center for Environmental Inquiry with Sonoma State University. And our public events are usually done at the Osborne Preserve on Sonoma Mountain in Pengrove or Al Galbraith Preserve near Yorkville and Mendocino. But this spring we have pivoted to a virtual space. We are so happy that lovely people like you have decided to join us on this virtual adventure. So thank you all for joining us today. Before I let John Lynch, our intrepid leader, take it away today, I want to tell you about what the Center for Environmental Inquiry is and how we can be a resource to you, no matter if you're affiliated with SSU or not. So you can be a student or parent, you might be a government employee or an educator, member of the public, or maybe you work with an organization that's in need of environmental solutions, which is what we specialize in. So the center envisions a North Bay that's all working together to find sustainable solutions. And we invite you to get environmentally ready with us, which is what my shirt says, if you can see this in the back lid. Oh,
My thing just
Right.
started.
So what we're doing is we're building a community of learners and problem solvers across all sectors of society, not just the ones you might traditionally think of as working with the environment. So we're talking about firsthand understanding of connection with the environment and then skill building experiences that result in these sustainable solutions. Getting people aware and motivated, prepared with knowledge, and then engaged with skills. So lots of different ways you can get involved with us. You can engage in research, which also doesn't necessarily mean science. You can be part of one of our training programs, such as our Naturalist or our land management programs. John has gone through one of those. You can do internships or student jobs with us if you attend the university. You can attend events like this, or you can partner with us on projects or events like this. There's data you can access, and you can contribute to ideas about new programs. So the point is that you, all 50 of you at this point, each one of you are really important here in addressing what we consider the greatest environmental challenges in history, quite honestly. So an engaged society is truly critical, and diversity is critical.
Oh, that's your name.
A really big thank you for you all being here today. And I had the pleasure of meeting on site at the Osborne Preserve in spring of 2013, which actually feels a bit ago now. I was a new grad student in the bio department at SSU, and I was taking the naturalist training program. And John had just finished naturalist training the previous fall. So he was helping us newbies learn how to lead tours. And John was clearly one of those naturalists that had this just very unique and powerful way of captivating the children's attention and focused attention. And it just allowed him to teach the natural and cultural history concepts and lessons with a much more success than a lot of other people. So I don't really think I understood at the time how his skill at storytelling was helping create this connection between him and the kids and the land. So I am just thrilled that he has now chosen to impart some of that insight to us all today. So before I let him do his thing, I do want to say just kind of how the event's going to take place. So this is one of our Learn with a Naturalist events. So what that means is it's pretty relaxed and personal. Everybody feel free to bring your cup of tea or sit on your porch. You can imagine that we are all together at the talking circle just outside the Ed Center at Osborne Preserve. And we have the oaks and the bay trees in a ring leading up to the sky with hawks and butterflies and clouds. Just imagine you're out in nature right now. We'd love to see all your faces. I'm glad most of you have your videos on. If we end up having a difficult connection on Zoom, I may have to turn your videos off because of bandwidth issues. So if that happens, you know why. Also, it'd be best if we could all be muted while John's doing the beginning of his presentation, but then when we have time for feedback and questions, feel free to turn those mics on, ask things out loud. So if you don't know how to do that, then you can message in the chat. So one thing I do ask you all today is, now that I think everyone's here, 52 people, if you could all find the chat function in Zoom and go ahead and just type your name in, because sometimes the names that are on Zoom don't actually match with the names you registered, and I need to know who to send the email to after the end of the event today. So it's going to be our sign-in sheet. So if you could all go ahead and find that chat box and just type your full name that you registered under. And that's also where you can ask any questions. So for example, there's something going on with John's audio, or you need to get a hold of me while he's speaking but don't want to interrupt, you can go ahead and type in the chat box. I also really quickly want to introduce Margot Rollins. She also leads events like this with the center, and she's just another co-host today. So if you get a reply from her in the chat box, you'll know who she is. Okay, now that is all I have to say, and I am going to give it to John to take away here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Carrie. And as you could tell from Carrie's presentation, she is a great storyteller. She embodies a lot of the elements that I'll talk about today. She has large, expansive movements. You can clearly see her expression. She uses a variety of modulations in her voice, and that's kind of what we're looking for from good storytelling on the trail. You might notice that my name is on here as John Lynch, which is my trail name. I'm not going to change it for this, but I am kind of surprised that Jim Moore didn't put in Tall Dude. Hi, Jim. Just to introduce myself a little bit differently than how Carrie did, I would say that my story really begins at probably about age 5, eating my sugar pops and telling my night's dreams to my father. His rapt attention and searching questions were heady stuff for a 5-year-old and quite addictive. For me, storytelling has always been the most natural form of communication. It's a way of bridging the past and the future using words, actions, and my unconscious. As an interpretive naturalist, there are so many facts and names to be communicated that a listener can easily feel overwhelmed and tune out. And I'm sure those of you who are naturalists have had that happen, both with children and adults. I think that there's probably about a limit of maybe 10 facts and names that you can use during a tour that can be remembered. At least that's, with my memory, that's about as much as I can do. Storytelling helps people relax, and it engages the left brain while anchoring information in a less judgmental and more approachable form. This afternoon, I'm going to tell you a little about how I use storytelling on the trail with children and adults. I'll share some stories and discuss a little about the nuts and bolts of my storytelling. I hope to share with you how I take my love of nature, unbridled curiosity, and environmental sensitivities, and through storytelling, kindle that same love, curiosity, and sensitivity in the hearts of others. So the plan today is I'm going to just give a list of some of the people who've influenced me. Many of them are in the community and are available to influence you if they haven't already. Then I'm going to talk about 3 ways that I can tell the same story. Just a plain factual, a narrative form, and the traditional form. Then I'm going to talk about 3 bases for my stories. Where do I get these stories anyway? Do they just pop into my head? Yeah, sometimes they do. But they come from myths, from history, and personal experiences. Now, storytelling has both formal stories and anecdotes. And if you'd like to know the difference, I'm not going to tell you because I'm not trained as I'm not an English major. I don't have formal training in storytelling. The way that I look at it is anecdotes generally are short. They don't necessarily resolve a central dilemma that a character has. They oftentimes are informational, but there's a lot more that you're going to have to talk to someone with better training than me to find out. But I do have a lot of them, and if you've been on the trail with me, you've probably heard quite a few, and you'll recognize the names of some of them. Then I'm just going to talk about the nuts and bolts of storytelling. When do you tell a story? How do you tell it? And how do you achieve your goals as a storyteller? Then we're going to be just about done. I have a little bit of an ending. I have an anecdote from Fairfield Osborne Preserve that has stuck with me and made me very humble as a storyteller and as a naturalist. And then we're going to complete a group story. We probably won't be able to do more than just a little bit of it today, but Carrie assures me that we'll be able to take your entrees to that and put them together into something that we can share for everyone. Then hopefully, if I don't get too long-winded, there'll be time for question and answers. And if there's even we can eke out just a little bit more, I do have a bonus story about the picture that was in the promotional materials of me holding a king snake. So my personal influences, well, probably the greatest one was my dad, Dick the Dreamcatcher, I'll call him. And then Jesse Longacre, who some of you may have had the privilege of taking classes from at the JC. He was a botanist, a naturalist, and a teacher. Greg Saris, who is an author, a social justice warrior, and the tribal chairman of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. Many books, and some that are just purely about storytelling. So I really encourage you to read some of those. Arthur Dawson, who's an ecologist and a historian, probably the only historian that I know who makes money without being in academia. Jeannie Worka, who I knew when she was the biologist at Audubon Canyon Ranch, and is now a nature writer as well as an ecologist. Annie Carla Ravetti, who is a professional storyteller, a master storyteller, an illustrator, wonderful artist, and trained as a biologist. She's from Petaluma and has worked with Audubon Canyon Ranch. And if you get a chance to see her, which I'm sure you will, if you look for it, it's well worth it. She will educate and entertain you. Breck Parkman, who is the retired senior state archaeologist and came up with the idea of the Sonoma Plains being the North American Serengeti. Wonderful storyteller. Liz Martins, who's the one of the people who's in charge of the ACR Living with Lions. She's a teacher and a wildlife translator. I have never seen a human being transformed into a mountain lion until I met her. Kate Marienchild, who I'm sure a number of you know, is an author and a naturalist, wonderful stories. Mary Good, who's an eco-psychologist from Sebastopol, a naturalist and an herbalist, lots there to learn from. John Young, who is a naturalist, an educator, a storyteller, and a tracker. Michael Sheffield, who's a naturalist and a poet. And I hope David Self is here with us today, because I'm calling him out as both an ecologist, a poet, and a photographer. So those are just some of my personal influence, people who've influenced me personally. I don't hold any of them accountable for my errors. Those are all my own. So I gave everybody an assignment to think back to the last time they walked in the woods and what that was like for them. So just take a moment, remember if you did the assignment, which I mean, I'm sure you all did. Just take a moment and recall that last time that you walked in the woods. The rhythm of your feet, the feel of the rain, the sun, or the wind, the smells, sights, and sounds surrounding you. Maybe you tasted the fresh, tangy, young needles of a Douglas fir. So these are the things I do on a hike before I tell a story. So, stories. Here's some examples of 3 different kinds of stories. It's all the same story, but they're just told in different ways. The first one's very short. It's just the facts. Ever since Homo sapiens evolved, perhaps 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, storytelling has been how we transmit information and culture between generations. That's it. Okay, now in a narrative form, a little bit more interesting, I hope. Imagine, as it grows dark, sitting around a cheerful fire with family and friends, sharing the events of the day. What happened, how you felt, your plans and hopes. These stories take on new life as they are recreated within each individual's mind's eye. When the sharing has gone full circle, it's time for the elders to recall the stories of the past, weaving them into the present. And lessons are passed on, each separate reality integrated into the imaginative collective. Now it's the storyteller's turn. As they take these lessons and giving them spiritual context and meaning, create and sustain culture. As the stories end, our human experience now blends into the crackle of the fire, the hoot of the owl, the song of the coyote, and the ululating chirp of crickets. Same story, just different way of saying it. Okay, now traditional, and this is one that particularly if you are have taken children out or are a docent at Bouverie, you're very familiar with this. This is the story of brave little Kulu Peace, the hummingbird, Anna's hummingbird. The old ones tell of a time when the land of the spirits was without light or warmth. All the spirit animals, they stayed in their holes, in their caves, in the mud by the rivers. Even Coyote stayed in his den. the only spirit animal that ventured forth was Bat. Oh, Bat could fly at night, as we all know, and Bat went out. And she hunted because her pups were hungry. And she hunted and she hunted. One day, she found the largest moth she had ever seen. We sometimes find that moth. It's called a sphinx moth. They are huge and beautiful. And she caught this moth and thought, oh, this is perfect. This will feed my entire family. And she was getting ready to take it to her pups when it spoke to her. Oh, please, don't eat me. Don't eat me. I have something that you want. And she said, that I want? I want to eat you. No, 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 no. Don't you want some light and some warmth? I know where it is. You know where it is? Well, I have to take you to Coyote. Yes, please, take me to Coyote. Just don't eat me. Okay. So Bat took Moth to Coyote. And when she introduced the moth to Coyote, Coyote got very excited. Oh, I'm the bravest. I am the strongest. I'm the most magical. I'm the one who should go with you to find the light and the warmth, because I'm kind of cold and I keep hitting my head on the rocks. So I need these things, so I'm going to go with you. And Moth says, well, maybe you want to think that over. You know, where the warmth and the light is, there are some brutal beings. They like to kill people, and they eat them, and they roast them over their fire. And Coyote says, oh, you know, maybe I won't go. You know, I have a bone spur, and I don't think I can do that. Does anybody else want to do it? Well, none of the other animals were willing to go and to risk their lives by going all the way to where these brutal people lived, except for brave little hummingbird, Kulupis. Kulupis, oh, she saw this as the greatest adventure of, well, I love calling her, but actually we're talking about a him. He loved adventure. And this was going to be the greatest moment of his life. He could follow this moth, and he hadn't been able to fly ever. He had these wings that he hadn't been able to use. So he said, okay, I'm ready to go. And Moth said, aren't you forgetting something? And Kululupi says, what do you have in mind? Well, if you're going to survive, you are going to need something to trade. What are you going to trade? And Kulupis thought, I don't know. What do we have? Well, some of the animals brought baskets of food. Oh, I can't take that. I'm too little. I can't hold that. Some of them brought baskets that were full of shells. I can't take those either. I can't hold anything and travel for so long. And finally, Skunk spoke up and said, you know, I have a great story you could trade. Did you know that at one time I didn't have stripes? Really? Would you trade that? Oh, yes. Well, as soon as Skunk started, all the animals had stories to tell. So she learned all their stories. And then Meadowlark, and you know Meadowlark. Meadowlark can remember every song that she's ever heard. And she said, you know, I can give you my songs. And Kulupi said, really? You'd be willing to do that? Oh, yes, I borrowed them anyway. You can have them. And so she taught her all the songs. Well, Coyote, he was not to be outdone. He said, well, I have something to contribute. I can make things. I can make clapper sticks. I can make a flute. And I know how to do these things. All you have to do is find a blue elderberry. And so he showed her how to make a flute and clapper sticks. Now, she had everything she needed. It was in her head. She didn't have to carry anything. And off she went, following Moth through the valley, over the tops of the mountains, over the desert, over the rivers, to where there was light. And she could see that it was beautiful. But she heard arguing. Oh, the voices. Oh, they were terrible. So scary. And she tried to avoid them and she landed in a bush. Luckily, that bush was a blue elderberry. And while she was in the blue elderberry, she thought, I'll make some of these instruments. Maybe that will keep me busy and they won't notice me and I can trade them before they eat me. So while she was making the flute, she started to hum. I mean, she was a hummingbird, right? So she started to hum. And as she hummed, she started to sing the song that went with the tune. Well, those spirit animals that were there, those beings, those brutal beings, they stopped their arguing and they listened. And she noticed that the arguing had stopped and they were all looking at her. And she stops her song and they said, no, don't stop. We want you to sing. We want you to sing. And she said, no, you're going to eat me. And they said, no. First of all, you're too small. We're not scared of you. And second of all, there isn't anything to it. You're just all feathers. Who wants a mouthful of feathers? Just come to the fire and sing your songs. So she came to the fire and she sang some of the songs and they were mesmerized. They said, more, we want more songs. And she sang all of the songs that she knew. And they said, is that it? Do you have anything else? And she said, well, I can show you how to make music, how to make instruments. And so they said, yes, please, we don't know this music stuff you're talking about. And so she showed them how to make a flute and how to make clapper sticks from the blue elderberry. And they said, is that it? And she said, oh, no. But before I go on, you're going to have to promise me that you will give me a piece of your fire if I tell you my most important gift. And they said, of course, you can take whatever you want. And she said, okay, here are my stories. And so she started to tell the stories of her people. Oh, it took many days. But finally, when she was done, oh, those brutal people, those spirit animals that had the fire, they were so glad. Their lives were enriched, and they were so grateful to her that they gave her the biggest ember of their fire. And she tried as hard as she could to lift it, and it dropped and broke into 3 pieces. A large piece, a medium piece, and a tiny, tiny little piece. Well, she was just distraught. I mean, how could she take this to her people? And the people of the fire said, you know, we have some spider webs. We'll take the spider webs and we can take those big pieces and wrap them up. And if you just carry the spider web in your claws, you can take it with you as you fly. And she said, oh, and that little piece, that little spark, I can just tuck it under under my chin and carry it back that way. And that's what she did. She carried that little spark under her chin and towed behind her the 2 ember pieces. And back she flew over the river and over the mountains and over the valley until she got to where her people lived. And when she got there, she let go of the spider webs and off flew the biggest piece, which gives us light during the day. And off flew the smaller piece, which gives us light at night. And she took that little ember and she dropped it at the feet of Coyote. And she said, here. And he started a fire. And the people had light and warmth. Every now and then, the children will come to Kulu Peace and say, why is your neck or your neck feathers all red? And she said, come to the fire. I have a story to tell you. The old ones tell of a time when the land of the spirits was without light or warmth. So, same story, just told in a traditional manner. I mean, I think you probably have a favorite. I certainly do. So I want to talk about the 3 bases for stories, the ones that I tell at least. The first is mythological, and myths come from all over the world. We grow up with myths. the myth that one of my favorites is one that's told by Homer in the Iliad, and it's the myth of Achilles, who was immortal except for the one place on his heel where he was held by his mother, Thetis, as she dipped him into the river Styx. And when she pulled him out, he could not be killed except in that one vulnerable place. Well, the story is more interesting than that, particularly if you read the Iliad, which I had to do in high school. So Thetis was really, his mother was Neptune's daughter. So that kind of makes her a mermaid, doesn't it? And she was the greatest of all of the healers. And in fact, she was so great that she could heal the gods. And one of the gods that she healed was Chiron, who was the centaur, who was the master of the centaurs. And she taught him her healing arts. And when she went back under the ocean to be with her father, she left her child, Achilles, to be raised by Chiron. And Chiron taught him the lore of the herbs and medicines. And one of the plants, and it's in the Iliad, if you care to look, was a plant that we call yarrow. But the name of yarrow, the scientific name, is Achilles, or Achillea mellifolium. Achillea mellifolium. And that particular plant has incredible powers. It's one of the oldest healing plants that we know of. It's a plant that's an analgesic, stopping pain. It's hemostatic, which stanches wounds, and it's anti-inflammatory. Now, this makes it almost a magical herb, and particularly if you are a general and you're fielding an army, and you go into battle, and your army is cut to ribbons. You take them back off the battlefield. You stuff the wounds full of dried yarrow. The blood is stanched. The pain goes away, and they are back to the field to fight the next day. And if you are the general and you're wounded, and you use this same herb, then it looks like you're immortal, doesn't it? Because you have a terrible injury that would kill most men, and you come back again. Using this knowledge gave rise, perhaps, to the idea that Achilles was immortal. We certainly don't know. I mean, he's a mythical character as far as we know, but thousands of years ago. So yarrow and Achilles. A historical story would be George Washington and the Rock Tripe. Now, this is a story that I first heard. I probably was maybe 12 years old. I was camped out at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, and I heard this story over a campfire. In the winter of 1777 and to 78, George Washington had retreated to his winter quarters after losing the capital of the colonial capital, Philadelphia. His men were not in great shape. They had been defeated. He had about 11,000 men at this camp. During the beginning of that winter, 2,000 of them died. They died of smallpox, typhoid, dysentery, and pneumonia. They were starving to death. And George Washington had, from the French and Indian Wars, had made some very powerful allies with some of the Indian tribes. And he asked his allies what to do about this, what they did when their people were starving and were sick. And they said, well, there is this lichen that grows on rocks. And we know it as rock tripe. It has a great name, if I can figure out how to say it. Umbilicaria mammulata. Umbulus, right? It's a cord that attaches it to the rock. And mammulata is small breasts. It's a little weird for a lichen, but the little bumps on the leafy part of the lichen is what gives it the reference to the small breasts. This particular lichen has some incredible qualities to it. It's nutritious, and it stimulates the immune system, and it's a thickener, kind of like dulse. You put it in some boiling water. You have to. It's a little toxic and bitter, so you have to boil it a few times to get the bitterness out and make it palatable. But once you do that, this makes a nutritious, healing soup. Not very tasty. So he ordered his men to find this rock tripe and to make huge boiling vats of it, and started to feed his troops. And it did. It filled their bellies. It warmed them in the cold winter nights. But they complained about the taste. And he said, "Well, do something about that." And sure enough, that they did. They went back to their camps and to their tents, and they pulled out little pieces of jerky and some old vegetables that they had stashed away, and some herbs and spices that they were saving, and they put it in these pots, and it made this soup, this stew, nutritious and tasty, and it got them through that winter. And after being encamped for 6 months, 9,000 survived and went on to the Battle of Monmouth, where they defeated the British and began the rout of the British from the colonies. So thank you, rock tripe. The last one is a personal story. And some of you have heard this, and I actually was on the trail once, and somebody told me this story that it happened to somebody else. So I know that and I know that people generally like this story, and I think it lets people know a little bit about what makes a story entertaining. And one of those is if you're as the teller, not necessarily the hero, but sort of the everyman. And in this story, I'm the everyman who makes the mistakes that you don't have to. So I was taking a class from Jesse Longacre, and we were studying edible and useful plants, native plants. And one of them was soaproot. And so I was quite interested in this because where I was living, there was a lot of soaproot. I could just go out and collect it as much as I wanted. And he talked about its characteristics as a food because it caramelizes, so it's sweet, as are the young shoots. And but more importantly, that it was used as a soap. It's got sopanin in it, and that it lathers and it breaks down the surface tension of water, so it's really good for washing. And the Indians liked it, particularly for its ability to be used as a shampoo. So I thought, this is great. The first semester was ending. It was coming on solstice time. I had no money. I needed to give gifts to my family and friends. And I thought, I am going to make some shampoo. So I went out and I collected my soaproot. I pounded it down. I added water to it. And I tried it out. Well, it was so watery, it just rinsed right out of my hair. It really didn't do much good at all. And I thought, well, it just needs to be thickened. I mean, shampoo has a little bit viscosity to it. So I thought, I know how to do this. I cook. I am just going to reduce it. So, put it in the water, and I put it on a very low temperature and cooked it. And it didn't watch very carefully because it started to boil a little bit. But I took it off, and the viscosity was perfect. It was just like the shampoo that you Prel or whatever you buy at the store. It was just perfect. And I thought, this is great. And I started to bottle it. And I thought, before I send this out as gifts, I should check this out and try it myself. So I go into the shower with my soaproot shampoo, and I start to put it in my hair. Well, I used to have a lot more hair than this. It's still kind of, it's a little longish, but I have about 10% of what I used to have. And I was very proud of it. And it was kind of dirty. So I was looking forward to the shampoo, and I'm putting it in my hair, and it starts to kind of like get a little gluey. And I think I've got to get this out of my hair. So I take some real shampoo and start putting that in there. Well, it was like using a reagent or something. It caused the soap root to start to harden. And I'm getting really nervous now. So I jump out, and all my skills from being a parent, I got to use, getting the gum out of my daughter's hair. I start with peanut butter. Put the peanut butter in. Nothing. It starts to harden a little bit. I use olive oil. It gets harder. And pretty soon it's like I'm wearing a bicycle helmet. And there was nothing I could do. I could not figure out how to get this stuff out of my hair. So there was nothing I could do but to cut my hair off. I had to shave it down to my scalp to get all of this goopy stuff out of my hair. I was so upset when I saw Jesse Longacre the next semester, and I explained to him, this terrible shampoo he had told me about. And he said, well, tell me how you made it. And I told him, and he said, so this semester we're talking about some of the other uses of these plants. He said, what you did was to reinvent a glue that Native Americans had used for centuries, if not thousands of years, to fletch their feathers onto the shafts of arrows, to paint knots that they didn't want to ever come out. They would use this glue because it was waterproof to paint the insides of the baskets so that they could cook in the baskets and they would hold water. And that's what I had put in my hair. So, yeah. My advice is let somebody else make the mistakes. Okay, so anecdotes. I mentioned a little bit about the difference between anecdotes and stories. So I'm just going to give the names of these because I love the names of the anecdotes. And sometimes if you've taken children out as a docent, as a naturalist, you might know what I'm talking about. But even the names are enticing. So the first one I always start with children is habitats and houses. The second one is what lizards taught me about fear. Next one is plant candy. Getting interested? You want to go on a hike with me so I can explain these? Sweet bedstraw, stinky pioneers, and cheese. Who was Hooker, and how did he get his name on fairy bells? How I first learned about stinging nettles. Pileated woodpeckers helped shape my redwood hypothesis. Making acorn meal taste good. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones, is teenager boredom, salt, and bay nuts, which is followed by bay nuts, the all-natural meth. Communes and acorn woodpeckers. Deer aspirin, maidenhair piercings. Oak galls and our Constitution. Poison oak tattoos. Canvas of the forest. Looking for an honest man with a fairy lantern. Slime mold engineers. If you eat wild peas, watch your butt, young man. Making mummies with old man's beard. And then, if I have time afterwards, I'll tell this one, the lemonade snake of Crane Creek Park. And then some stories. And stories generally I tell when I have a little bit more time and in a different way, like the story I told about Kulu Peace. How skunk and coyote turned humans into hunters. The guardian rocks of Bouverie. Grandmother Fur and the Mice People. King Alfred's cakes. How We Know Where Frog Woman Stole the Dreams to Make the Stars. So I'm not going to explain any of those. Like I said, you're just going to have to go on a hike with me. So some of the nuts and bolts of storytelling. When do you tell a story? Well, I can tell you when I tell it, and it's usually when I can capture people's attention long enough that I can keep it. But the times that it seem very natural are rest spots. And particularly after going uphill, when people are tired and out of breath, and I'm listening to them their labored breathing, and it's like, okay, this is a good time to stop and tell a story, as long as I am able to. So if the trail opens up and it's a good rest spot, then tell a story. While enjoying a view, if you get to the perfect place and everybody is quiet, enjoying the view, oftentimes they're open to storytelling at that point. When you come upon a quiet, secluded area, particularly under a tree, they're just natural. I don't know, trees just stimulate storytelling for me. During snack or lunch, you know, when people have their mouths full, they tend to have their ears open, right? And so it's just a good time. And I don't usually eat when other people are eating because I'm busy telling a story. And generally they appreciate it. Sometimes there's just low energy times, like after lunch, or you know, during a hard hike, you just have to rest and you kind of run out of energy, and it's a good time. And the other time that I tell a story is when I'm asked to tell a story. So, so again, if you're out on a hike with me and you want a story, just ask. So how do you do it? And I already mentioned Carrie and her kind of natural way of speaking. She's a natural-born storyteller, or I assume natural-born, although I think you have some theater background too, so maybe that's what it's from. So you want to enlarge your gestures, your expressions, your emotions. You just want to make everything larger than life. And use your voice. You want to be extra loud, a stage voice, or extra soft, a stage whisper, right? Silly voices are great, particularly if you're portraying different animals. For my Kulu piece, I really didn't get the voices down, but I do have some stories where I've been able to figure out a different voice for every animal, and I try to make them pretty silly, particularly when Coyote is having to deal with Skunk, right? And mannerisms too, silly ones. Using humor is always a good idea, and you can be crude. Matter of fact, farts are always funny. And repeating phrases. If some animals, some of the stories, you're going to keep saying the same thing over and over again, which lets people know who's talking, and it builds a rhythm in the story. Props. It's always nice to have some props at hand. You know, feather. You know, one of my longest stories is about the creation myth of Sonoma Mountain, and I can tell that entire story, which is pretty long, just using one feather. And it can be so many things. It can be the raft that Coyote is floating on. It can be the magical feathers that fall to the ground that the human villages come from. It can be the magic that he puts in his fur. It can be so many things. Now, the goal of telling the stories is to engage your listener's imagination. And you want to do that through the use of their senses. And you might have noticed that when I talked about how I start a hike, before I tell a story, I go through some experiences where people can experience these various senses. You know, the smell and taste and the feel of the moss and the sounds. And I mean, there's so many things that experiencing nature allows you to do that then lead to storytelling. Because what you want to do is you want the story to end up residing inside the listener, in the listener's mind's eye. right? You want to bring nature inside the imagination of the person. And once the listener is engaged, then you can invite them into the story. You can ask them questions. You can give them choices as to what should happen next. They can become part of the story. But you don't want to do that until they're engaged. Otherwise, things get silly really fast, even with adults. And you want to attend to your listeners' comfort. So just some basic rules of interpretation. You want to make sure that if there's bright sun, it's shining on you and to the backs of your listeners so that they can see you and be comfortable. You want to make sure that if they have been walking, that they are able to sit down. One of my favorite venues for storytelling is to have people sit on a steep rocky trail with me at the bottom. And so they're sitting down, I'm standing up, I'm at eye level with them, and they can be comfortable. You want to make sure that they're not too cold or too wet. And if they are, then you want to shorten your stories considerably. You also want to attend to people's hunger. Now, I'm getting really good at that with kids, and I'm not so good with adults. And I kind of forget that particularly as we get older, we need to be constantly having small little bits of nutrition. And so if you go on a hike with me, remind me that it's time to eat, because I tend to forget that. But it's really important. Nobody can listen to a story when they're hungry. And be prepared for distractions. There can be noises, there can be people passing on the trail, there can be friends who have to say hello, interruptions, already mentioned hunger, and also boredom. Sometimes, you're thinking you're telling the best story in the world, and, everybody's just like, come on, hurry up with this already. So when you encounter those things, sometimes you can talk through them and they'll go away. But usually it means that you need to abbreviate your story. And I'm just going to give you a little anecdote as to how and when that happened to me. This was at Fairfield Osborne Preserve, I don't know, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I'd taken a group of 5th graders down to the bottom of the preserve. We'd crossed the creek, we'd gone up into the chaparral, we'd come back down, across the creek. It was the end of the day, we were coming back up, and we had stopped at a stone wall, which is one of my favorite places for telling a story. And I had the Mice People and the Fir Cone story, which is a short story, and kids love it. And they had been collecting fir cones, so everybody was prepped for it. And so I'm telling the story, and rapt attention except for one boy who had been so involved in everything, answering all the questions, very knowledgeable, and he turned his back to me and was engrossed in something. I don't know. I couldn't figure out, it just felt really rude to me. And so I'm just kind of curious and a little miffed. And so I'm telling the story, and I walk around to where he is and go, "What are you looking at?" And he says, "Look." And so I bend down and I look, and it's a cicada coming out of its exoskeleton with these beautiful bronze wings just emerging out of the shell and expanding. And when they first come out, they're kind of glistening and green and bronze and so beautiful. Well, that stopped the story cold. I never got back to it. And instead we all just sat around watching this incredible miracle of the emergence of the cicada. We were late for the bus that day, but you have to be prepared. You're in nature, and miracles are going to happen, so be prepared. So now I want to move to the last part, which is your part. I would like you to complete the sentence, and you do this by in the group chat, and at the bottom of your screen there's a little dialogue cloud that says chat. You hit that, and you've probably already done this at some point, and put in the completion of this sentence, and try to keep it just to a one sentence length of a phrase. And so the sentence you're going to complete is, when last I walked in the woods. And I'll give you mine. When last I walked in the woods, I was brought to my knees by the fluorescent golden locks of a dog vomit slime mold. So go ahead and take a moment and do that, and then we'll have a chance to kind of look at some of people's questions here and see how much time we have to answer it. About 3 minutes, I guess.
Yeah, so with those 3 minutes, I think that if everyone can go ahead and answer that in the chat, we can also use this time when you're done typing that to ask John any questions that have come up for you during this time that he's been sharing. And then also, we will be able to stay, correct me if I'm wrong, John, a few minutes after, if anyone wants to continue questions. But if you have to leave at 2 or 3, we also understand. So I think while people are starting to do this, I'll just tell you a little bit about things coming up so we can get that over with. And then we can spend the rest of the time with John doing questions in this story. So I just want to say one more time from the center how incredibly thankful we are to John for just sharing this wisdom is what it is. So it's just so amazing to see everyone here learning from him and now contributing, I see in the chat. So I'm very excited. I will be sending everybody the full story that we're creating in the email afterwards. So do make sure that if you didn't already do so, you put the registration name that you used in the box. Otherwise, you won't get the email afterwards. So this is only one of over 24 events that the center has lined up for this spring. Most of them are done, but most of them have also been recorded and posted. So you can see the recordings of them. That's at cei.sonoma.edu/calendar. And there are 3 more events coming up still. So next Thursday, June 4th, is called Deep Dive, Sonoma Mountain Geologic and Climactic Evolution. It's a mouthful, but it is going to be wonderful, nerdy fun with Professor Nicole Myers. And she's going to talk to us about how the climate and geology of this area has contributed to the forces that form our land, like wildfires and floods and earthquakes. So it's a really timely topic. Then the next week on June 12th, which is a Friday, we'll be doing an event called Learn with a Naturalist, Field Sketching. This one's very exciting. It's by Oregon naturalist, educator, and biological illustrator, Christine Elder, and she's going to teach us how to incorporate nature sketching into field studies. We'll talk about nature journaling, and then she'll actually lead us through some fun field sketching of natural artifacts or organisms. And then the last one will be this showcase all about what the naturalists in our programs have created and shared for us, with Suzanne DeCourcy, our education manager, being the host. So she'll show us a bunch of short clips, talk to us about the program, and we'll get to have an inside view into what it's like to be a naturalist with the center. So all of those are available at cei.sonoma.edu/calendar. Do feel free to email me with any feedback and questions you have about this event, others, ideas for the future. We really want to get everyone your ideas. And next fall, we also will be doing a virtual series, not an in-person series. So if anyone has ideas about events they want to see, if you're a leader that might want to lead something, all of those are good for us to know. So it looks like we have a good amount coming through. And if it's okay with you guys, I'm just going to take the first 10 or so and just read the beginning of the story that we've created. All right, so the very first question was, when I last walked in the woods. All right, so let's see, what will our story become? Wow, you guys already entered so many. Scrolling up. All right, when I last walked in the woods, on wide fire roads, easy 6 feet apart, masks worn like scarves around our necks, I witnessed my 6-month-old grandson's fascination with the trees. I was surprised by the hovering in place of an ash-throated flycatcher. I became a gymnast, climbing over fallen branches and dodging poison oak. I was surprised at how late the buckeyes bloom this year. I saw Trillium just about to open. I wanted to go back in a few days to observe the opening. I had the pleasure of my son's company, and it feels like ages ago. I marveled at the beautiful unfurling ferns and light filtering through the trees. My curiosity was roused by a wren with a bit of food in its mouth. We noticed the beautiful, abundant, hidden life. The moss on the fallen oak tree moved, releasing the variegated green caterpillar. I marveled at the variety of birdsong, but lamented that they are so darn hard to see in the tree canopy. I was awarded with the view of a multitude of ladybugs emerging from their hidden home. That is just the beginning, everyone. That was already such an amazing story, wasn't it?
It was a beautiful, some beautiful poetry, images. Wow. So would people like to hear, I have a little story, a short one, about the photograph that was in the promotional materials. I mentioned it earlier. People interested in hearing it? It's pretty short. Yeah? Okay. So this is another Fairfield Osborne Preserve story. This happened probably about 3 years ago. It was in the spring, and it was kind of after a lot of rain. It was kind of a misty day. The bus shows up with 60 children, and they'd come a long way. I don't know whether they'd come from Healdsburg or where they'd come from. There was a long trip for them. They got there, and they didn't have the paperwork. So there were none of the release forms. You know, there was just no way to allow them to come onto the preserve. And the lawyers were called, and everybody, the powers that be were pleaded with, and there was just no way. And we had probably about I don't know, maybe 12 naturalists who were there ready to go. And we were all so disappointed, and we were talking about what to do. And someone came up with the bright idea of, how about we just all meet over at Crane Creek Regional Park? We don't need any paperwork to go there. So that's what we did. We got in our cars, they got in the bus. The naturalists went, we grabbed groups of kids, our parent chaperones, the teacher, and we each headed out through the hills of Crane Creek Regional Park. And on the way, Michael saw a king snake, beautiful, big king snake. And I just didn't want to take the time to deal with it. So I showed it to the kids, just, oh, it's all over there in the rocks. And we walked around and came back, and we were stopped under a tree. I think I was telling a story, and Michael comes up with his group carrying this big, beautiful king snake and hands it off to me. And it was just the most wonderful gift that I have received in a long time. And so I named that snake Lemonade, because of course we turn lemons into lemonade. There's the story. So, questions?
Well, I just love that you had us see that photograph before we knew the story. I see a question from, is it Elaine? Did you have your hand up? No? I'm gonna try and see if I can expand everybody here. And feel free and unmute yourself at this point. Now we can all just hang out. If you need help unmuting yourself, just raise your hand and I'll try.
Anne Reeves?
Hello, John. Thank you. Wonderful stories. Can you tell me, how do you remember the detail of those wonderful stories, such as the one you told us?
Yeah. Well, my memory is terrible. So, However, generally stories are a way, to anchor information. When you have to learn difficult things, if you can tell yourself a story, or one of the techniques of memory is to put things in different rooms and then walk in your mind through the rooms where these things are as a way to remember. I cheated a lot on this particular presentation because I had notes with me. Some stories I know very, very well. I've told them many times, and memory can be a challenge.
Thank you.
Another person asks, where do you find your stories?
Oh, well, Carrie, I had sent you some reference materials, and are you going to make those available to people?
I will, yes. So I'm going to be sending an email out at the end, either today or tomorrow, with those, and as well as a few things that have gone on in the chat box, just so we can capture what was discussed.
So I have a number of books of particularly Native American stories, some of which were from the early 1900s, the late 1800s, that were collected by social anthropologists. They tend to be kind of fragmentary. And then there's also some wonderful stories. I gave a list of the people who have influenced me, and many of the stories I tell are stories that I learned from them. And the best place to get stories is dreams. I mentioned a story about Frog Woman and how she made stars from dreams, and that came to me in a dream. So it's a story I told my family at solstice as a gift.
Do stories ever come to you when you're in nature?
Well, yes, particularly people who are docents at Bouverie probably walk by this one outcrop of rocks all the time. Well, I looked at the rocks and I saw a rock guardian, and I saw the evil rock gnomes hiding behind it. And a story came to me about how Coyote, when he left to the west, which is why we don't see him anymore, when Coyote left, he left guardians behind, and they protect the trail for the children. So that just came to me as I was walking along.
Is anyone else here a nature storyteller?
Eleanor, speak up.
I see a few of you.
No, I'm not a nature storyteller, though.
No, that's true. That's true. Not a nature storyteller. You're just a storyteller.
But folk tales and personal stories.
I was a
I see
naturalist.
Linda.
Yeah, I was
Linda.
a naturalist at Tilden Park, East Bay Regional Parks, for like close to 35 years. So I loved using stories. Still do. Still use stories. In
And
fact,
Linda,
Eleanor and I are in the same program at the Asian Art Museum, where we tell folk tales all the time.
And what's the response? Is it mostly for adults or children?
The museum has this incredible program where they bring young kids, as young as preschoolers, into the museum, and then we interpret the museum and the art in the museum through folk tales. And we do it for adults and families too, but it's primarily for school groups.
Yeah.
and Linda mentioned something in the chat about an upcoming opportunity, so I'll send that out as well.
Great, thanks for doing that. Yeah, it's going to be super exciting. 8 days of storytelling from people all over the world. When you see the international lineup, it's incredible.
And it's funny, okay, so I've never said I'm a nature storyteller, but I mean, thanks for that vote of competence in the beginning, John, seriously. So nice about how I was giving my intro. But I think so many of us are already more of storytellers than we understand, and I think that this event has really helped bring that about and given me a little more courage to go into depth with some of those things that maybe I'm doing naturally because I have a theater background, but now that I can kind of pinpoint some of the strategies, I don't know, I feel like I'm going to become a nature storyteller now.
Good.
Yeah, and in this presentation, was purely a deconstruction of my storytelling. You know, there's lots of books about storytelling from professionals. You know, there's certainly other ways to learn, and this is just trying to understand for myself why and how I do what I do.
Can I mention one more thing? The National Storytelling Network does have a special interest group of environmental storytellers. So if you can go there, you'll find lots of people across the country that, you know, do this too, that love nature and storytelling, the environment and storytelling. So it's a really good group to be part of.
Yeah, is that in the chat message that you sent? Or if not, can you add that?
It's basically the same link, but that particular link goes to just the conference info. But yeah, I can send you the link to the environmental storytellers.
Great. John, there's another question in the chat that just says, do you have any other resources or ideas on how to get started, right? For people that really aren't used to storytelling, maybe. So
my suggestion would be to start with personal stories, things that have actually happened to you. And so you don't have, so there's nothing to remember, right? To Anne's point. Because we all have had something. I mean, look at these wonderful contributions that people have made to the stories. And each of those in and of itself is a little vignette that a story could be built around. So we have those experiences, and it's just having the confidence, I think, to step forward and to do it.
I'd like to suggest another way that I've found very useful to get started is to look at children's books about nature and about animals, telling stories about either how something came to be or a relationship. That's been really useful because you see the whole structure, beginning, middle, end of a story, and you can create descriptions and create sounds and voices. That's a nice way to get started. The children's library section.
And actually on the in this presentation today, Clellie Gummer I noticed her little face in there, and she's a published author of children's books. She does the illustrations as well as the books. I think she's left though, so.
I'd like to offer another idea that just came to me, not really considering myself a storyteller in the way of sharing myths or folklore or things like that, but I realize that when I'm out leading a group, I'm using my experiences with that place to tell a story because I'm so engaged with that place. Like, for example, Annandale, I've been going up into since the mid-70s. So I have like an intimate personal relationship with the particular patch of redwood trees. And I might be able to tell a story of what I remember seeing back in the 70s or something like that. So I can actually tell about those places. So the more you experience a place, you can tell the story of that particular plant or spot or why the lake looks this way or something. So I think that's a great way to realize we all probably do this all the time.
And Sarah, by the way, just wrote the most wonderful essay on redwoods.
Thank you.
At Annandale. And if you get a chance to, I don't know how available that is, but I'm sure if people contacted you. Sarah is the, what are you, the assistant?
I'm an Annandale
volunteer coordinator for Annandale?
Volunteer coordinator and senior park aide, but I'm a lifelong nature lover and participant, so.
Yeah, and which also made me think of Jim Warr, tall dude here, who, when I first started at Bouverie, I went on a hike with him, and he said, just do it. Just tell a story. You know, it was like, okay, come on, you guys know, you've been in training now for, you know, however many weeks it was. You know all about those torrid spiders. Just tell the story of the torrid spider. And I was so shy and reticent to do it, but Jim was just not going to let that pass. And so I got over that initial hesitation. Thanks, Jim.
Oh, thanks. Hey, just a thought. Is at Bouverie, we have 3rd and 4th graders, and that makes it a lot easier, because if you have the younger kids, they tend to drift off and not so much, and too much older than that, they're getting close to being teenagers and all that. And so it's just such a delight to have 5 of these kids with you, and they're all just jumping up and down, and they're so excited. So it's really a wonderful thing to do, and so that's what I've been doing since 2001, I think it is, or something like that. So it's been great, and John's another excellent person for us that we have out there. So glad to see you here.
Thanks, Jim.
And that does remind me that some people might not know that just a couple years ago, the Osborne Preserve started a community member naturalist training program. So it used to be more focused on SSU students, but now we have 2 separate programs. So the one for community members is shorter days, shorter number of weeks. There's no like tests due to internship credit needs, right? So a little bit more focused on community members. So if anybody else is looking for a way to teach the same age range, we teach 3rd through 5th graders, there's another program that you might want to look into, and that's also on our website.
Yeah, and just that's being supported by the Federated Indians of Brayton Rancheria. So
yeah, completely, that's the only reason we were able to start that program in the first place. I have a request for the few of us here that are left. I have this beautiful screen of everybody here, and I would love to take a group like Zoom photo. Is that okay? We all just kind of wave, or like hold up a mug, or maybe even a book. I don't know, something to just take a quick photo.
Sure,
That's
one
perfect,
page,
John.
I'll do another.
Say that again, Margot.
Because there's still 40 people here.
Oh, well, I can only see the, a certain screen, but okay.
Right, so you do screen 1 and I'll do screen 2.
Perfect. Okay, so are we ready? I'm going to hold up my orange device. And 1, 2, 3. All right. Did that work out, Margot?
Yep,
What
got
did
it.
you say?
Great.
I wasn't on Zoom.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry if you could make it in for some reason.
I just wanted to add one thing. I teach 3rd graders, and this year we did a project on interviewing your elders, and that's a really great way to have the story kind of called out of you if you're an elder, or for the youth to actually experience that story being told to them. I mean, anyway, everybody's sort of a natural storyteller, and so once you get them going, it's all there.
Wow, what a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and children are wonderful storytellers.
Yes.
You may need to herd them a little bit in their story, because they tend to meander a little bit. But boy, I've heard some great stories from kids.
And I see a comment that Sarah is willing to share some nature articles she's been writing, which is amazing, and it reminded me of something. So we're actually creating an anthology of little pieces and works that have come out of these public events. So if anybody was inspired today based on this event to write or tell a particular story and would feel comfortable having that included in the anthology, it would need to be a little bit of a shorter one, a page or less. We would love to hear it. So we want to know how these events are inspiring people. So if anybody does want that included, email it to me. And it's okay if it takes a week or 2, right? So anyway, that's just something that you have the opportunity to share. All right, any other questions for John before we take off?
What is the title of the hummingbird story? What is the title of the hummingbird story?
It's a brave little Kulu piece.
How do you spell that?
Kooloopis.
Okay, thank you.
And just a little bit about that story. I was emboldened by Greg Saris, as the tribal chairman, reading his books about making stories. He says, when you see these stories different tribes, the same story in different tribes, they're told in different ways.
Mm.
And which one is correct? You know, which is the real story? You know, which is, it's kind of like, you know, that's how all stories were. I mean, Homer, they don't even think he was a person. They think these were just a collection of stories that survived time, that were told by bards for thousands of years. You know, the Bible, I mean, they're a collection of stories told by many different people over thousands of years. So, so which one is the correct one? And so what I did for that story was I read 6 different versions of it from 6 different tribes, and then had a dream and integrated them to make that story. So that story actually doesn't exist separate from my own consciousness. But it has pieces of all 6 of the other ones, as well as some strange unconscious stuff that happened.
It's so personal. It's personal, historical, cultural, all given as a gift to us through you. Thank you, John. Well, everybody, I think I am going to call it time. We've already spent another 22 minutes because we're all so excited about this topic. So
Thank
again,
you.
feel
And I
free.
just want to say one last thing. If you're interested in hiking with me when we can hike again as groups, I have my hikes coordinated through a meetup group. It's called Sonoma County Hiking in Nature, or Walking in Nature, excuse me. Sonoma County Walking in Nature. And all you have to do, it's all free. You just sign up for Meetup and you apply to be a member. And, you know, as long as, you know, you don't say terrible things about me, you can. And then you'll know about the hikes that I do for the state parks, as well as any other hikes that I might be coordinating.
I just put that in the chat too.
Is
Thanks
your
for the reminder.
contact info on that, John?
What's that?
Is your contact information on there too?
Through the Meetup, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being a part of this today. I hope you go out there and are inspired to tell stories you already have, to put together the stories that have been forming, or maybe you didn't even know they were there before. And I hope this helps you feel connected to nature and more skilled and able to help other people connect to nature and to each other during these crazy times we're living in. So thank you one last time for joining, and one more time for John. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Carrie.
Bye.
Bye.
And John, I'm just going to stay on with you if that's okay, to just wrap up a few things.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.